Real Dads Lead.
And welcome to the Real Dads Lead podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne Smith, and next to me is my fellow father, Matt Hamilton. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm great, thanks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we were just talking a little bit about a video that we watched, and in this video was a Jordan Peterson video. He was interviewing Rafe Kelley, who I don't really know much about. Have you heard of him before?
The name did sound familiar, but I don't.
I mean, it's interesting. He seems like he has some kind of
following for sure.
Yeah, following and some kind of program that he helps people with, basically physical things. Parkour, I think, is a big thing for him. And so that was pretty interesting.
And the topic was
rough and tumble play.
Right.
So with your kids, that they desperately need rough and tumble play. And I found that was very educational. So my kids are older, and I don't think I can do rough and tumble play with them anymore because they would put me in the dirt. But I mean, they are big and strong now.
Yeah.
But we can still do rough and tumble play, I suppose. But you are in a different situation where you've got younger ones who can still engage in that, and you got an infant who will be coming up. I guess I might have grandkids.
That's true.
So if I'm going to have grandkids, then I could do some rough and tumble play, which makes me think I better keep myself in shape.
Yeah.
I can't let myself go, so that because I want to enjoy that with my grandkids.
Yeah. And they want to enjoy it with you.
And they want to enjoy it with me.
Yeah.
So it makes me think a little bit about making sure I'm eating right and still getting my exercise in. And for any of you dads out there who are past the age that of your kids, but maybe engaging with your grandkids if you can. Not everyone's in the same situation, so there's some dads that had to figure out different ways to engage. But that was just a thought that came to my head on that. But in general, I watched pretty much the whole video. I know you've watched parts of it. And it was fascinating to me that there were so many things. I just thought, when I was roughhousing with my kids and playing with them and wrestling with them, that it was just fun. It was fun for me and fun for them, but
which is true.
It is true. And that's a good way to learn these other skills. I didn't realize until listening to this. I'm like, well, it's developing social skills. It's developing empathy for other people.
Right.
It's developing restraint for yourself, being able to know what your limitations are. And I think to me, that's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And there was lots of other benefits that they had said. Yeah. But all in all, it's just a lot more comprehensive in what it can offer your child, physically, emotionally, psychologically. Yeah. So that's what we want to talk about, right? Like rough and tumble play with your kids. How important is it?
How do you encourage that? What ways have we done, and what ways could you do to act it out and practice it? And just overall, how you can help your kids benefit from that rough and tumble play.
Yeah.
So it can be something simple. It doesn't have to be necessarily roughhousing. They were talking about some games on the video that just you could do. And it made me think. It wasn't on the video. It made me think of the little hot hands game. Have you ever played that little hot hands game where they put your hands on the thing and you try and slap them? And and you just, my parents did that with me all the time. Just quick little things. I know my dad loved doing that with me, and he's got gigantic hands, so
there was no escape.
There's no escape. Those big giant paws. But I can remember doing that. Did you ever engage in rough and tumble play with your dad?
My dad and I and my brother, we roughhoused. I mean, it seems to me that we did it quite often, and we have several videos that kind of keep that memory alive for us. He was a busy guy. He was a detective, so his hours weren't always exactly the same. But he was, again, as far as I can remember, the way it felt to me, he was intentional about spending time with us, and that was a pretty favorite activity. We would gang up on him, get dad to the ground,
Oh yeah,
when we're
right.
6, 7, 8 years old. And yeah, he'd let us beat up on him, making all the noises that and and like we're taking him out and taking care of business here, and then he'd turn on us, and pin us to the ground, and he'd rub his hand up the hair on my neck and make me squeal, and all kinds of things like that. And we just had a fantastic time. Really great memories with my dad.
Oh, that's awesome.
And with my brother doing that.
Yeah.
And now I've done the same thing with my own kids. I think last week I ran my own hand up the back of my teenage boys' hair.
Okay.
And had them in a hold so that they couldn't get out. Last night on the bed, I'd pinned both of my teenage boys on the ground and had them in a place where they couldn't escape. And I was digging my fingers into their rib cage, and they're like tickled. They're being tickled so badly they can hardly stand it. And so we still do it. My sons are almost 16 and 17.
Okay. Yeah.
And that brings up another point too, just lest we forget. This kind of surprised me. Peterson did say that psychologically, according to the studies, it seems to be beneficial to start rough and tumble play as early as 6 months with your child, which probably, you're not tossing your 6-month-old onto the couch or around the house, but, flipping them over and tickling them a little bit and, blowing raspberries on their belly. It's that kind of thing, like for my infant, after I've changed his diaper, he's now trained to kind of anticipate when I put my head or my face on his belly. He starts to giggle because he knows I'm going to start moving upward, and then I get up under his neck.
Right,
and he
right.
can't control, or keep me out from his neck. He just laughs hysterically, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking a little bit about when I'm playing with my kids, when I played with my kids. I mean, I guess a couple schools of thoughts, because there's one that says you should never let them, if you're in a game or whatever, never purposefully lose to them, because it basically teaches a false,
everybody's a winner kind of a thing.
Yeah, everybody's a winner. Yeah.
Here's your fake trophy.
Yeah.
That you didn't deserve.
And it doesn't necessarily give them,
a sense of real accomplishment, because they know that you let them win.
Right. And then there's the other thing was don't just always beat them. Beat them to the ground all the time, because then it's no fun for them.
Right.
And
so that's the other extreme.
So there's got to be a healthy balance. So it was interesting the way they addressed that in the video of basically handicapping yourself and doing things, if you are doing some kind of competition, that you would just basically make it fun for yourself, because you are doing something that you don't have full strength, but you can still compete, type thing. Whether it's doing something with one hand or doing something with no hands.
That's right. So it's imposing a limit on yourself that is not imposed on your child, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So like you said, wrestling with only one arm, or being on your tiptoes, and if your heels touch the ground, then you lose.
Oh, right. So
I think that's great.
I thought it was pretty, a pretty good suggestion on how to do that. So,
or fighting with your left hand if you're typically right-handed.
Right. Yeah. Or running if you're in a race. Whether you are giving them a head start, or limiting yourself with how you run, like you skip and they run, or you bear crawl and they run, depending on the age. Yeah, that's interesting ways to do it. We did in basketball. I'm right-handed, so we could play, and I would just play with my left hand. I can only shoot with my left hand, type thing. Something to that effect.
Yeah.
Or when they have the little tiny tykes basketball hoop or whatever, and you're just you're on your knees anyway. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes though, the kids, they can get big headed, and you have to put them in their place. So there's some times where I would be like, oh, I'm just going to not only beat you, I'm going to beat you to the ground, so that you're not all that. So that's another thing I think about, how to kind of figure out how to raise self-esteem, and without going into an inflated ego. Um, so just being able to give them confidence, but not too much. Well, I don't know. I think confidence is a good thing, but not overconfident,
And
or
certainly not a false confidence.
not a false confidence, and not pride. That's a tightrope sometimes that we have to walk.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are some, as the kids get older, some traditional and maybe not so traditional for some people ways for kids to continue to do these things. Like I said, as a dad, I still do these things with my almost adult boys. I mean, biologically, historically, they are adults.
Right.
So there's always that. And I think I really would recommend that. But then, of course, there's sports. And Rafe Kelley was talking about how he was diagnosed ADHD when he was a kid. And that's a whole big conversation. Whether or not he should have been, a lot of boys are. And in my opinion, unnecessarily. There's just there's a difference there between the sexes, and oftentimes boys they're not meant to sit there for hours and hours in school. But regardless, he was diagnosed with this, and ended up being homeschooled 2 hours a day. He was doing his school stuff, but then the rest of the day he was just running free in the woods and experiencing all this. And martial arts came along, and that was a really great outlet for him. Really fantastic out. There's something deep that resonated with him, not in the philosophy of martial arts, but in the physical expression of it.
Right.
And in how he could connect with people through that. So yeah, there's lots of different ways. I really would love for my boys this next school year to get into jujitsu. I'm thinking about doing that with them. So yeah, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's that's always good. They were talking a little bit about the boys versus girls, and so you've been talking about the roughhousing with your boys. Rough and tumble play with the girls. How does that look?
I mean,
I would probably imagine, is my guess, like the tickling thing would probably be something that is normal for a father-daughter type thing.
There's lots of tickling in our house. A lot. The shortest lived tickling is that of my wife. When I tickle my wife, she just can't handle it. And if I go more than a few seconds, turns into a fight.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
Not really, but she's like, you've got to stop. But I'll tickle my kids forever.
Yeah.
The girls definitely, they love to be tickled, especially my youngest. Now she's almost 12. But yeah, lots of tickling. But I mean, it's basically the same thing. I mean, I'll tackle them. I'll throw them on the couch. Well, we've had pillow fights and whatever. They talk about this kind of challenge between a physical challenge between you and your children, and how important that is. So it's not necessarily that you're like sparring with your child or fighting with them, but you're providing them with some kind of opposition that is fun, for them to have.
Right.
So probably about 6 months ago, it was just me and the girls at home. I don't remember what everybody else was doing, but I'm trying to remember what happened. I think I was pretending that I couldn't walk or something like that. And my girls, when they were hugging me, I could just kind of like fell on that, like real limp, and they started cracking up because they're trying to hold me up and I'm refusing to stand up by myself. And so they kind of like drag me into the living room, really struggling to do so, and try to put me on the couch. As soon as they put me on the couch, they kind of half put me on the couch, and I allow myself to slip and fall off. And literally for the next 30 minutes, they are scrambling to get me to pick me up and put me on this couch. They're trying to use leverage and,
Yeah.
getting all these other things. Like maybe they can put me on this and then onto this. And
Yeah.
I just let them do it. And I'm
Yeah.
just cracking up the whole time. I'm
Yeah.
not helping them at all.
Yeah.
But they loved that moment.
Yeah. That is neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did the same. I had this from my dad, and then I did it with my kids. Basically, it was practice. If there's a fire in the house and dad's unconscious and laying on the ground, could you get him out? So I was just laying on. I can remember doing it with my dad, and we were like trying to get him out. We'd have to have some extra strength at that time. I was a lot younger, and I was in the young stages of my life, so wasn't as strong. But we did it with my family as well. And my Jill would say at that time, she'd say, "Oh, you might just have to burn. We can't get you out." So that was, yeah, I can understand what you're saying on there.
Yeah.
It's also an interesting point they brought up in the video. They talked a little bit about the spectrum of touch and play, and they talked about dancing. Like dance is also part of that rough and tumble play. So I imagine dancing with your girls and things like that, or with the guys, that's on one end of the spectrum. But it's more of when you mentioned the combative, there's one end of the spectrum, and then the collaborative is what dance is on the other end of the spectrum. So being able to do both of those and have that combative play that helps you to grow, but also have that dance collaborative play where you are working and coordinated, and working together. I thought that was pretty interesting as well.
I hadn't got to that part.
Yeah,
my family definitely loves to dance. They are homeschooled, and they participate twice a year in something called the Celtic Ball, where they go on a Saturday morning, learn how to do the dances for 3 hours, and then that night with their dates do those organized dances for 4 hours, and they love it, and it inspires a lot of dancing in between throughout the year. So they'll throw songs that they know how to dance to up on Spotify on the TV, and sometimes I'll dance with them, and we just have a lot of fun doing that. And oftentimes I'll dance real silly with the girls, spinning them in and out, in the kitchen, and it's good. It's a good time.
Well, when you talk about the back to your point when you said that 6 months that play should begin, I know Jill's side of the family had this little tradition of these infants before they basically could walk, but they could hold themselves up, they could stand, that they would take the infant on one hand and just balance them so they're straight up, and they're just got one hand lifting them up in the air.
That's crazy.
And doing that. We've got pictures of Jill's dad doing that with our kids, and I would do that with our kids and things like that. So I hadn't thought about that until you had mentioned at that 6 months, to be able to start some of that rough and tumble play. And they loved it. I mean, you're up there and you got them balancing, and they're just having a great old time. So that makes sense. I'm gonna have to come over and do that with Elias.
Yeah.
See how your wife
make sure she's not home.
Which does mention, I mean, let's talk about that. How do you not necessarily get your wife on board, but just there's a difference. There's the motherly concern, and then there's also a fatherly desire for
and intuition, I would say.
And intuition.
As a father,
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I think two things that I'd love to cover before the podcast is out is addressing that, talking about helping moms who rightly and intuitively have this strong sense of nurturing and protecting. How do we encourage our wives to let our kids be rough and tumble and take risks, etc. But then also maybe addressing the current cultural climate about boys. Again, there tends to be this cultural put down of any kind of aggression in boys. Like you have to tame the boy, essentially feminizing the boy, and why that's not good. So the first thing to cover with the wives, I think there's probably a ton of men listening to this who have experienced just that. I mean, firsthand. I mean, your boy wants to do something, and every kid's different. Some boys want to push the limits further than others, but you've got boys who want to be rough and tumble, and they want to take risks, and they want to test their abilities and their skills. And the mom is petrified, because surely if he does that, he's gonna die,
right?
Or otherwise he's gonna break his arm or whatever it might be. And I think we talked about this a little bit in the protection segment, so a month or so ago. That's a really hard thing to do. I think he mentions it in the video. The tendency is for men to kind of back off, to be passive, and to in an attempt to avoid any kind of confrontation with the wife, just like give in, say fine, like let's just not do it. And I've done that in the past, and I do regret it at times, because especially after watching something like this, again, you see the value and the necessity for them to experience these things. And when you think about throughout history that this is how kids grew up, like we've heard our parents talk about how it was like, school's out, you're home, homework's done. Okay, go out. There was no where you're gonna be. It was like, no, just go out, have fun, run through the woods, be with your friends. As long as you're home by this time for dinner, we're good. And Rafe talks about that, running through the woods, like imagining dragons and, all this other kind of stuff. And I read through some of the comments. It was the same stuff. They were like, I remember when I was a kid, it was the same thing. We'd constantly test ourselves walking along, narrow walls and single file line. And, it's that kind of stuff that doesn't really happen anymore. But that's really essential to a child's development. So having a conversation with your wife, apart from the situation, it's kind of like when you're in an argument, or something's happened, it's not the best time to sit down and reason this out. So outside of that, to say, look, this is really good for them. I promise I'm not going to let them do anything that is going to endanger their life, but it's okay if they fall down and get bruised up or even break an arm. It's going to be okay. I may have mentioned this before, but I've fractured or broken about 16 bones in my life so far, and ruptured an Achilles tendon and whatever.
You need to drink more milk, dude.
Yeah, I do. I drank so much milk, dude. I drained so many cows when I was little. But anyway, you learn through those experiences, and you have a lot of great memories and whatever. So having that conversation with your wife outside to let her know that you care about them as well, and you're not going to let them push the limits. The other thing, though, with the culture, I found very interesting with this podcast was he said the studies show that there's minimal, like almost, it seems not even worth mentioning, connection between violence in somebody's life, like real violence, and they're playing violent video games.
I didn't remember that, right?
But he said rather, and this is what's so ironic about this conversation. He says when people have studied those who've been violent in real life, mass shooters, whatever it might be, a pretty consistent thread apparently is that when they were little, they were prevented from this kind of play. Like hardcore, like, no, you can't do those things. Right. And so it's like this late expression and like release in the wrong way of what they should have been releasing and expressing when they were much younger.
And I think the culture, it's like the opposite. So you're trying to prevent that type of violence, but you're doing it by trying to prevent it at an early age, preventing any type of aggression, and it's backfiring
because aggression doesn't equal violence.
Right. Exactly.
I think that's probably at the root of the problem.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Very interesting.
So let our kids play. Let them be rough and tumble. Let them imagine, like the little boy who, and we had this again, like there's going to be dads who chuckle at this because they've had the same experience. when my kids were little, before they ever saw a gun, as far as I knew, they were making guns
Yeah.
out of their sandwiches.
Yeah. All right.
And then they were using them,
Yeah.
or, carving knives, or if they
Yeah.
didn't have a knife to carve a knife, it was, this was an imaginary sword and they were chopping somebody's head off, or chopping a dragon's head off, or whatever it might be. That's not an evil thing.
Yeah.
It's okay for them to be pretending and
Right.
having fun like that.
Yeah.
Don't stop it.
Don't stop it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there could be other circumstances
Right.
where, but it's pretty evident, if you know that there's some kind of a dark presence or whatever that's their dark path that they're going down.
And that's
But
tricky. It's tricky
it
though,
is
because
tricky.
because that's a very subjective thing.
Yeah.
Ideally both parents are in agreement that there's something dark happening
Yeah.
here, because like I've said, if the mom thinks that something that this is really bad, it's just, she just feels that it's bad. Well, that
Right.
could just be the product of her own upbringing.
Yeah.
If she's
Right.
only been in a family of girls, or she's all over social media and she's hearing all these terrible things,
Right.
then she's just fearing the worst
Right.
in her children. If the dad is not in agreement on that, he's like, no, this is totally fine. You're gonna have to have that conversation again.
Do you think there's also ways that you can promote or encourage this kind of adventurous stuff where I think a lot of things that we were talking about, and even in the video they were talking about the kids initiating a lot of it, and don't prevent it, but as far as, all right, as a dad, probably it would be smart or productive to just say, okay, hey guys, we're going out and we're going to walk the creek, or we're going to go search for crawdads, or things like that. I mean, I would just encourage the dads out there that find ways, things that you probably did as a kid that sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I can't believe I did that. Hey, maybe go do that with your kids. Maybe go do that with your kids. I mean, we did some things that I'm like, okay, I don't want my kids doing that, of course. But
do you care to share?
Well, I mean, my dad would pull us. I would have a skateboard, and he'd ride his bike and pull us on the skateboard, and he would just start flying. And I got to the point, even as a kid, I was like super, super scared, because I've hit a little rock on a skateboard before and just go flying off, which I did then as a kid as well. Even there were times where we would do that with a car. So it's kind of like, you ever watch that Back to the Future? And Michael J. Fox's character's like on the bumper in the car, he's got the skateboard. Yeah, we did that too. I'm not sure I would do that, but something similar. I don't think the bike thing is all that bad, but
that's fun. I agree. It could be something as simple as just getting out and playing. We were playing knockout basketball this week. You're bumping into each other. It's just high intensity. You're running around, and it could be simple things like that. But definitely, again, like, to bring it back to the rough and tumble, don't neglect those things, because that's face to face. You're all up in my space in a good and healthy way, and I'm releasing this intuitive, natural, physical tension that I have. Don't neglect those things. Let your kids live that out, and protect it as a father, and initiate it as a father.
And I think also sandwich it with embracing, and because you don't want every physical contact just to be rough and tumble. You also want that physical contact to also be loving touches.
That's right. So this, as with basically everything that we'll talk about on the podcast, is only part of the picture. This is a puzzle piece in what it looks like to be a good dad and raise healthy kids. Right. I love that advice. Sandwich it with loving physical touch, lots of hugs, kisses, words of affirmation. I'll say one more thing that I do with all of my kids. I've done it, but I'll put my arm around their back with one hand, and I'll take my fist and I'll punch them in the stomach. and when I punch them, I'm not really making contact with my fist, but I'm lifting them up with my other arm. So it looks like I'm punching them. They're flying up in the air, and they're cracking up. And I'll do that several times, and it might be that's it. It might be totally random. I might just like jump them, and start doing it. Or it might evolve into, a full out wrestle. But either way, right at the end, they're laughing, and I'll pull them in and I'll hug them and tell how much I love them.
Yeah.
That kind of, maybe that's a good picture of what we're talking about there.
I think so. Well, good. Stimulating conversation.
Yeah, fun. Makes me want to go wrestle with my kids.
Oh, yeah. That'd be good. So, hope you enjoyed this little episode of the Real Dads Lead podcast. And I just thank you guys for listening. Good job, Matt. Don't forget, Real Dads Lead.